So, welcome everyone to an In Conversation with the Meeting Centres. My name is Emma Smith. I'm the project manager with Empowered Conversations, which is a project of Age UK Salford. Thank you, Shirley, Thomas, Ron, and Graham for joining us today. I'm really excited to find out what's happening with Meeting Centres. Shirley and I were just chatting. We did a webinar during COVID, so it's really good for me to know what's happened since then. So I'm excited to find out about that. Our plan for today is I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Empowered Conversations if you haven't come across us. We're then going to go into a conversation about the meeting centres, and we'll make sure that there's time at the end for questions and answers for anyone out there watching. So Empowered Conversations deliver communication courses for family caregivers and also for professionals across Greater Manchester. We deliver one-to-one dementia-focused therapeutic support for family caregivers. We run online groups and we also do regular webinars like this. Our work empowers families to live as well as they can by keeping channels of communication and connection open. We've got a hello there. How are you doing? So yeah, as I said earlier, if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A and we'll make sure that we have time at the end to pick those up. And I think we will make a start if that's okay. So Shirley, I'm going to start with you. Oh, yeah, I was waiting until you said hi, Emma. Hello. I'll start with you. Could you please introduce yourself, Shirley?
Yes, I can do that. Hello, I'm Shirley Evans and I'm Director of the Association for Dementia Studies at the University of Worcester. And I've been working on meeting centres for 10 years now, since 2014, which has been amazing. It was a complete change for my life and work direction, absolutely. And I'm very involved in community initiatives within Herefordshire, having set up a meeting centre and involved with other initiatives as we've got funding and grown as a charity.
Fantastic, Shirley. And for anyone who's watching now or maybe watching on YouTube in the future, what is a meeting centre?
Well, a meeting centre, in a nutshell, is a local resource operating out of ordinary community buildings, which offers warm and ongoing friendly expert support to people with mild to moderate dementia and their families. And at the heart of the meeting centre is a social club where people meet to have fun, talk to others and get help that focuses on what they need. An important aspect is that meeting centres are based on sound research evidence of what helps people to cope well in adjusting to living with the symptoms and changes that dementia brings. And the way that they're set up as a sort of a community initiative, bringing in a range of stakeholders, helps address the fragmentation of care that might be in the community. So it's a very flexible model, and we'll be hearing a bit about other sort of meeting centres across the UK, but there's a huge variety in the way they've set up, but all sort of meeting those what is encapsulated the essential features of a meeting centre, and very much that they're driven by people living with dementia and what they want, rather than them being a service that's put there because somebody else thinks it might be a good idea. And it's really that they fill a gap, should fill a gap in the dementia care pathway. All of that was sort of based, has been going, it's a model that came from the Netherlands back in the early 1990s, developed by Professor Rosemary Dreurs. And as I've mentioned, that the evidence base, that goes back, back to that time, but then it started to build up that evidence base of what works, what the model is, really in around 2004 to 2006. And that is really important. That evidence base is international. Meeting centres exist and have been opened across the world, from Japan, Australia, to obviously the UK and around Europe, Aruba, and starting perhaps now in America, but I think the driver not only is that warm environment, but also that evidence base, which is really, really important. And that's kind of how I got to get started on this with the Meeting Den project, which was started in 2014, ran for 3 years, and looking at this Dutch model of meeting centres, could it be replicated in the UK, Italy, and Poland? So that very model, and also could the benefits that have been found over those 20 years of evidence base, could the benefits then be replicated?
It sounds like a very sort of bottom up approach. No, not people looking and going, oh, well, I think we
Yeah.
need this over there and we need that over there. It's more very much around meeting the needs of people, but people identifying that themselves.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of a meeting centre that started up? You know, how does that happen?
Well, I was very much involved from the outset in Leominster Meeting Centre, so that actually opened in 2016. So in the Meeting Den project, which I mentioned, we needed, as part of that project, to open a meeting centre as part of the research, which at the university we did, and we got one going in Droitwich Spa. So that was the very first meeting centre which opened in the UK, which opened in 2015. And it was, I just started work on the project, and I was driving through from my home in Leominster, well, just outside Leominster, to Worcester. And I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be fantastic if we had a meeting centre here in Leominster? Now, was very naive at that time, was very new to health and social care, so it was quite uh, an aspiration really to do that. But I had a chance meeting with somebody from the council and said, can I come and speak to you about meeting centres? And they liked the idea. Bearing in mind this is 10 years ago, it wouldn't happen now. And they said, oh yes, can you write us me a proposal for the meeting centre, which I did. And a few weeks later, we had funding for Leominster Meeting Centre. So it was absolutely amazing. And we managed to open that. We had to open it quickly because it was going to be part of the research project. And we got it open in 4 months, going through all of the sort of process you do of getting local stakeholders in and saying, do we need a meeting centre? If we do, who's going to be support it? You know, who's going to run it? How are we going to get the information out to people? How are we going to recruit people? Where's it going to be? And all those sort of key questions. So that's where that got started in the research project, and that was funded by Herefordshire Council for the first year, but then by the Alzheimer's Society. And then we thought, well, the research project is coming to the end, the funding is coming to the end. It's a great place. We can't let it go. What are we going to do? So then it was involved in setting up a charity, which we set up in 2017. So that's been going 7 years. We just merged with another charity in Herefordshire. And that's how really where we got going. So we've been open all that time. It's been amazing.
It almost sounds unbelievable that you could have something up and running within 4 months and funded.
It does now.
It does now.
It absolutely does now.
What have been some of your biggest challenges?
Well, funding, obviously. Funding has been a really big challenge. I mean, in the model, the meeting centre in the Dutch model is open 3 days a week. I mean, that's not possible for a lot of meeting centres, particularly in the UK. Funding is very different in the Netherlands, and some meeting centres are funded by the municipality, and some meeting centres perhaps are funded by health insurance as well. So we've got a different scenario there. And quite a few in the UK are open 1 day a week, but Leominster somehow seems to be open 5 days a week. Well, we were open 3. Then we thought, oh, we need to open another day, perhaps a quieter day for some people. And then when COVID came and then we'd closed, then we opened and then we opened again. We needed to have more time for people to be there with smaller numbers. So we got a bit of extra lottery funding. Most of our original funding came from the lottery. And so we opened 5 days a week, and we're still open 5 days a week, which is great because it gives people choice. And the dementia pathway is different to how it might be in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the 3 days is really because people attend the meeting centre for 3 days, and the other 2 days they do something else. Well, in the UK, generally, there's nothing else. So that's where we are. So funding, uh, on that ongoing funding is a challenge trying to, we're funded at Leinster by participant fees, grants and community fundraising, but some of those have reduced, obviously, the grants and community fundraising in the present economic climate, and then trying to get members in so that we can increase our income from participant fees. But often getting people to come into the meeting centre because A, they don't know about it, because referrers don't understand them, don't tell people about it, and B, people might not think it's something that's going to be a benefit to them. So also a challenge. Yeah.
Thanks, Shirley. I've got a challenge at the moment because I've got a boiler being fitted on the other side of that door. So I hope none of those noises are coming through. What are the opportunities around meeting centres?
Well, the opportunities have been amazing. And you mentioned about how we'd had a conversation at least 3 years ago about this. And we said, well, what's changed? Because I don't know that you knew what had changed since then. But during that time, one thing is that we've met Graham and Ron. So that's been a massive opportunity within that. But it's about Leinster Meeting Centre being quite a springboard for spreading the growth of meeting centres across the UK. Now, when we last spoke at the beginning of COVID, of the pandemic, there were 13 meeting centres in the UK, and now there are over 70, which they just grew. We just got so much interest during COVID. You know, I honestly thought I was going to be furloughed because that was my job there, was to get meeting centres spread. So my whole job, and I thought, blimey, this isn't going to happen, but it has. And, you know, a lot of that came through not wholly of meeting loads of people across the UK, but not least meeting Graham. I think that's where I'd like to pause and hand over.
Thank you, Shirley. Graham, perfect opportunity for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, Emma. Thanks, Shirley. Yeah, I'm Graham Galloway. I am the Chief Officer of a new charity in Scotland. I was involved in the establishment of the first meeting centre in Scotland, Kerry Connections, which I think when we had the previous chat, at that point we were the only meeting centre in Scotland. And now, as Shirley says, there has been this explosion and we're up to nearly 21 in Scotland now, 21 on the cusp of it. So Meeting Centre Scotland was established as a kind of national network to help with the development of meeting centres in Scotland, but also to be the kind of the community of practice, the support base for developing new meeting centres, and really the organisation that can help to advocate for meeting centres at a national level, which is something we've had quite a bit of success in actually in the past couple of years.
Brilliant. Will you tell us a little bit, for anyone who doesn't know, will you tell us a little bit about Kerry Connections and how that started?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kerry Connections started off originally as a dementia-friendly community project. We were part of the first cohort of projects that the Life Changes Trust funded in Scotland. The Life Changes Trust was a fantastic organisation that was given a £25 million endowment by the National Lottery over 10 years to look at kind of new ways of supporting people who were affected by dementia. And a big part of what they did was investing in dementia-friendly community initiatives. We were one of the first ones that they founded, and we're really fortunate that we were given 3 years core funding to really embed as a project within the sort of small rural town of Kerrymuir. when that initial funding was coming to an end, it was towards the end of 2017, I think, I was starting to think about what we were going to do next, because we'd been really successfully done all the initial things we'd set out to do. And it was at that point that I read about the meeting centre model. There was an article in the Journal of Dementia Care. And to me, it just really ticked all the boxes for what we were looking for. It was that kind of really person-centered, strength-based approach. It was very much a community development, as you were saying, bottom-up approach, that grassroots approach, but also one that had this really strong evidence base behind it. And obviously, the article was talking about these pilots that had been done in Droitwich Spa, Leinster. So at that point, I kind of emailed Shirley. That was the first time I got into contact with her. Started up a conversation, and I think it was only a couple of months after that I came down to visit Droitwich Spa, Leinster. And round about the same time, I think you just got the news about your lottery funding, Shirley, which was fantastic news, that this news to kind of expand was, and it just kind of took off from there. So we at that point then made a decision that we were going to attempt to become the first meeting centre in Scotland, and worked very closely with Dawn and Shirley and all the team at Worcester to make that happen, and launched in, I think it was May 2019, we opened as the first meeting centre in Scotland.
And you said you've gone from like 1 last time we met to 20 now. How did that happen?
A lot of it has very much been the legacy of the Life Changes Trust. So a lot of the initial meeting centres are other dementia-friendly community projects that were supported by the trust. A big thing about the way the trust worked was that there was always a focus on collaboration and partnership working, and coming together to kind of celebrate things that were working. So as we were developing the idea of meeting centres, we weren't doing that in isolation. We were very much doing it alongside the trust and alongside all these other amazing projects that we'd worked with up until that point. And as I suspected, as much as we were interested in the model, so all these other organisations were as well. So that initial kind of flush of meeting centres very much came from other projects, a lot of projects, not all, but a lot of projects that had been funded by the trust. There then came a couple of really key bits of funding that came through. So the trust I'd mentioned was a 10-year time-limited trust. But and the first year of COVID, as an organisation, they made a decision that they were going to end a year early, just so they could get more money out the door at a point it was really needed. And the final fund that they put out, their £1 million local legacy fund, was focusing on all that kind of learning they'd had over the past 9 years, but really focusing on post-diagnostic support and community support. And in that, they were looking at kind of 3 really key thematic areas. So one was peer support. One was, oh gosh, this is terrible. There's only 3 I've forgotten. It was peer support, post-diagnostic support, and meeting centres were the kind of the 3 key. Oh no, sorry, dementia-friendly communities. Yeah, peer support, dementia-friendly communities, and meeting centres were the kind of 3 areas. And that £1 million investment was really substantial. And that enabled a lot of those new meeting centres to get going. It was then followed by support from Age Scotland. So Age Scotland ran a small grant scheme for seed funds that helped support 5 new meeting centres get started. And then one of the other really key things that's happened since then is the new Scottish Dementia Strategy. And we've been working with the Dementia Policy Unit for a few years now, and are delighted that meeting centres are now actually part of the Scottish National Strategy.
Wow, I mean, that's amazing. Is that a 5-year strategy, 10-year strategy? What are we going with?
10 years. So it's a 10-year strategy, but with 2-year implementation windows. So it was very much a collaborative process, and Ron will maybe speak about this in a minute, because Ron was involved in the lived experience panel in designing that. But the idea is there's no point in having a 10-year strategy that's static. So there's 2 years implementation windows, and every 18 months they're reviewed, and the next sort of 2 years are assessed at that. So meeting centres are there in that first 2-year implementation window. And again, there's a number of thematic areas. The ones that are really particular to meeting centres, again, are diagnosis and post-diagnostic support, and particularly the resilient communities theme, which we're hopeful we'll see even more meeting centres develop coming out of that.
Will that bring funding opportunities?
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. As with many strategies, the issue is there's no real budget behind this. So I think we'll probably see some small grants coming through, but a big part of the work that we're doing just now is arguing that we need to have statutory support for these services. You can't, on the one hand, say that meeting centres are, as the strategy does, that meeting centres are a valid form of post-diagnostic support, but then not fund them the same way statutory post-diagnostic support is funded. So there's a big question there around that, but those conversations are absolutely underway, and we're delighted that we have an equal seat at the table for those conversations now.
Oh, it's a really positive situation to be in. You mentioned Meeting Centres Scotland. That's new. I haven't heard about that other than spotting it on Twitter /X. So tell me about that.
Yeah, well, very new. We literally just launched under a month ago. We had our launch event in Dundee. So Meeting Centre Scotland really came about after we'd seen this kind of explosion of meeting centres within Scotland, but also realising that we were getting genuine buy-in from the government at that kind of top level. So it was felt by the meeting centres that we really needed to have that kind of organisation that it could not run meeting centres, but that's not, Meeting Centre Scotland is not involved in actually the operational side of meeting centres. It's very much a support network, but it's there to kind of advocate at those top tables for the meeting centres and hopefully push to the point where we can get that statutory support for them.
Wow. Thank you, Graham. Ron, I think I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay. Could I please ask you to introduce yourself, Ron?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ron Coleman. I'm the chair of Deepness, which is a organisation in the Outer Hebrides, but I'm also chair of Meeting Centre Scotland. I work really closely with Graham. I have dementia. I've got vascular dementia, and I've had cognitive issues for over 6 years now. So that's really who I am. Yeah.
Thanks, Ron. Ron, how are meeting centres different from other services?
Well, they exist for a start. I mean, although Scotland had a post-diagnostic support aspiration, in a lot of places it was really postcode lottery, but where there is a meeting centre, then there's actually something happening on the ground. And I think they're different in a few ways now in Scotland. I think one of the main things we've done is we've looked at governance and taken that really seriously in terms of we're aiming for a third of each board to be people with dementia, a third to be family members, and a third to be workers. So that the idea that people with dementia are in the centre, front and centre of this, the centre is really important to us.
Sounds like co-production is a really key element of meeting centres. From a personal level, Ron, what do you get out of attending a meeting centre?
Oh, yeah, well, our meeting centre again is in Stornoway, which is that some people call it gale force because that tends to come before they say what the weather is. And the great thing about, for me, it's a place where I can meet with my peers and have honest conversations about the direction I'm going or we're going. And the other thing that we again do is we don't have support workers in our meeting centre. We have artists and residents. So we've essentially become an arts project, and that's not outside of the remit of being a meeting centre. It fits perfectly with the meeting centre model. But it also gives us a focus. And to be honest, and I've said this to other people, sometimes it's easier to get arts money than it is to get money for running a dementia service. Because the first thing we come up against is we already do that. And they're talking about a day centre, and we're talking about something totally different from the day centre ideas. Yeah.
I like the flexibility within the meeting centre, that it can look like this and it can look like that, and people with lived experience can drive what that looks like and make sure it's right for them. Ron, last question for you. What do you think meeting centres offer the wider community?
Well, I've been to Kerry. I've seen how Kerry works. I know our own. I know Stand and Fife, and I know that it doesn't just work for people with dementia. It doesn't work just for the, if you like, who you would see as the obvious client. It works really well for families, and it offers a different route for families to get their support. And I think that's an important aspect. We have family members that come to our meeting centre, who some weeks will stay and some weeks will disappear and leave their loved one just working with us. And I think the fact that it's open to the community. So we've had, and it's just beginning to happen for us, but our dementia nurse pops in now, and that never happened at the beginning because we sat, there was 3 of us sat for about 3 months before we started getting people to actually come through the door. And that was important, that just waiting for it to happen and trusting in process all the time. So we get that. We sometimes have other workers from other services, like Alzheimer's Scotland service pop in to say hello and to discuss what's happening within the island community. We've also taken charge of the Scottish Dementia Arts Festival. We set that up as a group, and that's very focused on meeting centres around Scotland who, because there's a lot of art going on in meeting centres, that makes up a lot of the exhibits for the actual festival. So yeah, it's really important because that's hitting the larger community. And in Inverness this year, we're going to be doing a day of the festival where groups of their dance groups are going to be dancing a piece of work that's been commissioned for the festival. But that's involving a much wider community in Inverness than just the dementia community. So it's becoming very real in terms of how it impacts on our communities.
Thanks, Ron. It sounds like they're really embedded within the community, and you give out as much as you might take from the community. It's very equal. You're not just there as we need support. You're actually enhancing the community around you by the work that you do. Sounds really exciting. Thank you for
I
sharing
think
that.
all the meeting centres do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ron. Thomas, last but not least, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello, I'm Thomas Morton, and I'm a researcher. Basically, I work at the Association for Dementia Studies in Worcester, and I'm mainly, researching researching meeting centres, and particularly things like the sustainability of meeting centres and what can be done to help meeting centres keep going and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Thanks, Thomas. We've sort of looked at some of the challenges over the last 10 years, but what do you think are the challenges going forward for meeting centres?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's the same old story, which is really depressing to say to some extent. But it's not, and not just for meeting centres, but for third sector kind of initiatives in general, for post-diagnostic support, if it's not, run directly by statutory services and so on. And it is the funding is probably the biggest factor. I mean, it's not just the funding, but certainly the funding is one of them. And I think one thing I wanted to say about this is it's not just about having enough money to run. I mean, one thing is that meeting centres, they are run in very different ways, and they do have and they can be more expensive or less expensive to run, and usually a good chunk of covering costs comes from is sustainable and does come from the from members or community fundraising or whatever, but there's always likely to be a need for some form of external support. And if that isn't constant ongoing, then you can't really expect everything to just be constant ongoing in its absence. So it's kind of it's one of those chicken and egg things. And I think the knock-on effect of that of the way that things like meeting centres tend to be funded, which is always short term and always kind of in competition with other groups, is that it has that thing of it's just incredibly disruptive, and it means that you do get this situation where you're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel. If you want something like a meeting centre to be stable and then be able to improve and develop what it does, then you need to be able to plan for the future and to say, well, this is going to be here, so we can actually work on it and develop it and so on. Whereas the situation is that you tend to get something like a meeting centre pops up and then it can't continue to run, so it stops, and then a meeting centre pops up, and then and so you just constantly get this kind of endless cycle of people essentially trying to do very similar things but then not being able to continue. So that's one thing that that we're trying to change, really. And I think that's the what's good about meeting centres is we've got a real kind of well, yes, there's a real kind of motive behind it now, and there's a lot of meeting centres which are there's obviously growing and proliferating across the UK, and that gives it some real clout, I think, to say that this is something that is working and actually needs supporting. And I think that's the real that's the real good thing about the position that meeting centres are in right now. Because again, I think one of the things that's a massive challenge is competition. I think in the whole kind of sector of dementia support, really, different groups and different services being put in competition with each other is kryptonite, because there's not enough resource out there and people need to work together and everything needs to link up. And as long as if it links up, then it's much more powerful and much more kind of there's much more support out there. Whereas if people are working against each other, then it really just doesn't work. It's it is just that simple. And yet with the as I say, there seems to be this kind of we just can't seem to get away from this idea that competition is the way it should be, as if it's a business, and it's not a business. It's not there to make money, and it's not there to be in competition with anyone else. So this idea that you have this bid and tender thing where we have meeting centres and other groups competing to provide this service and then become completely sustainable, self-sustainable, so you don't need any external input. It's like you wouldn't run other health services like that. It's just so yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge going forward, really. That, and I suppose the other thing I should say is the integration of meeting centres with the more kind of formal health and social services in the pathway. And that's not just the health and social services from the pathway working with meeting centres, but health and social services talking to each other and actually communicating with each other and working together, so that when someone gets a diagnosis, they know exactly where to go, and they have this kind of clear kind of path through what's on offer, and not having to themselves really go out and knock on doors and phone people up and research and find out what's out there for them. So yeah, I think those are the biggest challenges going forward, I think.
Thomas, that just sparked a question in my head. Are there any meeting centres that are already embedded within sort of statutory health and social care services?
I don't know, if not being run by statutory services. No, not as far as I'm aware. I mean, there are meeting centres that do have quite strong links, via with the pathway, but the meeting centres are always, so far as I'm aware, run third sector. You know, there's always a charity group. I mean, and again, sometimes, and that can vary quite dramatically, and that could really be a very grassroots group that's just come from the community and created the meeting centre, or there are some meeting centres that are run by national charities, such as Age UK run some of them, and so on. And as you heard, Alzheimer's Society have run them in the past. So it does, yeah, there's a variety of different ways of running meeting centres by different groups, but it's always been third sector as far as I'm aware.
Thanks, Thomas. You talked about the challenges. What do you think we can do to meet those challenges? What can be done?
I think we've covered quite a lot of that with certainly, what Shirley, Ron, and Graham have been saying. I think that's one of the things I think that meeting centres are very good at is, again, those links with the community. And I think that's one thing that, and speaking up basically about, advocating for people with dementia and speaking up about the cause of groups like meeting centres, that they need to be there and they're absolutely essential to people. I think that's, and that's, again, because meeting centres now, we have a UK-wide network and we have meeting centres Scotland, and you know it really is giving more voice to people and more kind of impetus for things like meeting centres, not just meeting centres, but also other things like meeting centres that meeting centres can fit in with and work with. It's just saying that there needs to be something out there to support people basically at this level. So I think I think that's part of it is meeting centres are a good way to kind of campaign and raise the profile of or dementia-friendly communities in general, I think. So yeah, and I think as well, stressing the kind of again, that meeting centres are not, sometimes we get hung up on seeing it as purely to do with health and so on, and whereas actually meeting centres are much wider than that. And again, it's to do with arts and culture. It's to do with people not being excluded from communities and not being excluded from opportunities to get involved with things like arts and culture and so on. And I think that's a really big part of what meeting centres are about. So yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. Before I go on to the last question, this is your opportunity to drop any questions into the Q&A. So if you just look at there's a little button at the bottom that says Q&A, you can drop your questions in there and we'll make sure that we pick them up at the end. Okay, Thomas, last question for you. And you've hinted at it already, but what's the value of meeting centres for health and social care pathways in the UK?
Yeah, well, I think this is one thing that we're trying to get across as well, is that again, it's not just that meeting centres are providing a particular service at a point in the pathway. It's that meeting centres can actually act as a hub, so they can actually act as a place which connects other things up. So when they're working as like they should, in as well as they can, then they will be a place where other health and social care services can actually come into the meeting centres and actually do various things. And there's a range of activities that can be done there, and people can find health and social care services via the meeting centre. So, partly it's acting as that hub for other services to actually get involved with and actually reach people through. But it's also, I think, to do with, again, raising the profile of like dementia-friendly communities and actually saying that that you get out there that's essentially trying to destigmatize dementia, and so that people will be actually more comfortable with seeking help and so on, and also with helping people to. We've obviously have examples of meeting centres where they can reach people who maybe don't have a diagnosis yet, and can help people to access the services and access the support to get a diagnosis via the meeting centre. So the meeting centre can actually help with creating a more seamless pathway and actually helping everything to integrate more, which is something that health and social care services are trying to do through things like integrated care boards and so on. So I think it's potentially has a lot to offer.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, everyone. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions. I'll pick them up from the Q&A at the bottom, but I've got a few questions. So what's the smallest example of a meeting centre in the UK? To anybody who wants to answer. Who knows the answer?
Ron.
Yeah, we live in a really rural area. And on one of our islands, we go over to meet with one person. and her story's quite amazing, and she enjoys singing, and we meet in a place outside the care home where she lives, so she comes into the community for that, so it's not in the care home. And from being a resident in a care home, we're now working to get her out of the care home, because she's moved on so much by being able to do things again, that I think they're finding it harder and harder to justify keeping her in a care home. So we're hoping that she'll actually move to the local community. And Graham and I were chatting about this, and you've had an example of that as well in Kerry. And so I think it's not only are we extending people's community time, we're actually in some cases can reverse the care home time, which is a really interesting thing to watch happening. And it gives me a lot of hope that I won't end up in a care home.
When I asked that question, I didn't know what answer I was going to get, and I can't believe that answer. That's absolutely fantastic. The difference that you're making to that lady's life. Okay, so at the other end, what's the biggest example of a meeting centre?
Oh, it could be Kerry Connections.
Well, I think there's a limit, because you don't want to be working with huge numbers of people in a meeting centre. So Kerry Connections and Leinster are probably quite similar. We're both open 5 days a week, but we're not working with more than 15 to 20 people each per day.
Yeah.
I think you'd be the same, Shirley, wouldn't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it really is about that. You know, if you're working with 20 plus people, then suddenly you're not doing that proper relationship building. You're not getting to know people. You're not having the time to sit down and really get to know people, and which is what the key of what meeting centre is about, is that genuine strength-based person-centered approach in meeting centres. So I think the fact that we're both open 5 days a week means that probably we are open longer than most meeting centres, which might be 1, 2, or 3 days a week. But as far as size goes, I think there's a cap really that you wouldn't be working above.
No, I think from Rosemary Drowse has always said it's around about 15 people maximum, people with dementia. Then you will have some carers, staff, volunteers, visitors, and I know when we've been up to 25, and it's just too busy, it's too much. And you can't, it's outside of the meeting centre ethos. So absolutely right, as Graham says, there is a cap, and probably less than that really. Some meeting centres. So Ross on Wye has 12 maximum of 12 members. They have carers that go, and that varies. Some meeting centres insist that carers go, and some don't. It's entirely open, but they have a maximum of 12 people with dementia and family carers, and that's it.
Thank you. So we know that we can run with one, and we know that we've maybe go to 15, and 20 is at the absolute max. If any bigger than that, it's not going to be a meeting centre. It's just not going to have the same ethos. Thank you for that. Okay, so now I want to think for anyone watching or listening to this, what happens in a day? So your centres are both open for 5 days a week. So what would a day look like at one of your centres?
Well, I mean, it's very varied, but obviously it's about choice and about what people want to do. But if you're open 5 days a week, or even 1 or 3, you need to have some sort of program in place and a plan. You can't sit around saying, well, we've had this conversation, haven't we, Graham, a while ago. What are we going to do today? Nobody wants that, because actually nobody really knows the answer to that. But at Leinster, they'd so the manager or member staff would sit down with people several times over that month and say, what do you want to do? What should we do next month? And from that, they develop a sort of plan for the whole month. And is something in there'll be something in the morning, there'll be lunch, because well, we've got another project which we haven't got time to talk about today, but food is very important and quite key to the Dutch model and very important to people. So then be a lunch, and then something in the afternoon, bearing in mind that, you know, if it's open for a minimum of 5 hours, and that's important, that people can, that not every, you know, it's open at 10 and shuts at 3. So things don't start at 10 because people are coming in and sort of, I don't mean drifting in, but just turning up when they can, really. So you've got something a bit late morning, and that might be before lunch. It could be anything. It could be arts, it could be just conversation. There's definitely lots of time spent where people want to, what I call the opportunity to loaf around and just chat, rather than saying, right, this is what we're doing now. Now we're going in here, we're doing that. Also, there'd be choice as well for people who don't want to do arts and crafts and they want to do something else. They might be going out for a walk. Leominster, we're quite lucky because we have quite a few carers who will give lifts. So they go out at least 2 or 3 times a month as well to something like bowling, or out to a local place, to a cafe, or there's within walking distance. So that's generally the day, generally 10 o'clock till 3 o'clock. With a whole variety of things that people are interested in and feel motivated to do, and is not put on as far as you can, an activity that's impinged on somebody. That's what we do at Leominster, really.
Thank you, Shirley. Graham, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to say that, you know, I don't think there's such a thing as an average day in a meeting centre,
No.
because each day will very much depend on who's there and what they're interested in doing. So at any one time, you might have 4 or 5 or 6 different things happening at once. So it's just why one of the key things about a meeting centre is the space that you have. That you have a space where you have quiet rooms where people can go if they don't want to engage in an activity, but also that you have enough room that if somebody doesn't want to take part in a musical activity or whatever it is that's going on, that they can go and do something else. So I'm still based in the Kerry Connections Meeting Centre, and I don't know if you see people going past all the time outside here. So I know earlier on there was about 4 or 5 members have just gone out for a walk because it's a nice day. They're probably going round to our garden round the corner. So it's great, you know, it's based on what people want to do. And as the membership of the meeting centre changes and new people come in with new skills and new hobbies and new things they're interested in doing, it'll evolve and change. And I know, Ron, you took quite a while before you figured out what you were going to do with your artist, didn't you? Because you just kind of sat around and chatted for the first few weeks, didn't you?
Yeah, we including the artists, we didn't let them really just come in and do something. That we insisted they got to know everybody. They sat, they chatted, and the sort of artwork became organic. Then it became something that was a shared idea, and we still do that. And we recently had one artist that couldn't handle it because they couldn't sit down and do nothing, and they moved on because for us it's important that the people with dementia are in charge of that whole process of what happens, and the conversation's just as important as the art. Often, yeah.
Very much feels like doing with, not doing for. To sum up, yeah, so we're doing it together. Okay, so we've got a question from Sherry. She says, hi, I work for a living care company where we support many people living with dementia. Would a meeting centre be an option for them, even if they have care in place to support them? Or is this solely for people who have limited support?
No, well, as you heard, really, that it's flexible. So, you know, we definitely have people who come to Leominster Meeting Centre who are in residential care. Not a lot, but it happens, and it suits some people. So yeah, If it suits them, then it's fine. Not at all. It's about choice.
We are actually in the early stages of discussing the possibility of a meeting centre being embedded within a hospital. So I think that it's a really, really flexible model. I think if there's an appetite for it and people are interested in developing it, I think there's potential there, really.
Yeah, that's right. And there have been meeting centres there has been a meeting centre in a care home, and there's certainly meeting centres in supported living. Definitely that now. So we've got 2 examples of that in Worcester, which works really well. So some of the people that are in the supported living go to the meeting centre, and then people come in from outside as well. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Sherry, the answer is yes.
Yes.
I think Karen said the growth of numbers at the meeting centres clearly shows the want and need for them. Involving the community and not just those with dementia and their carers is a fabulous idea for inclusivity and enhanced understanding of diverse communities. Great stuff. Oh, there you go. It's a comment. It's a great stuff. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of our talk today. Thank you all so much for giving your time. It's been fantastic to sort of follow and find out what's happening with meeting centres. I think we'll do the same again in 3 or 4 years. We'll come back together and we'll see where you are then, if that's okay. So thank you all for your time. Thank you everyone for coming along to watch. Our next In Conversation is on the 1st of May, and it'll be an In Conversation with Dr. Catherine Talbot, who will share her work on the role of digital technologies supporting social connectedness, identity and social inclusion for people affected by dementia. So thank you all once again. I'm going to say thanks, Ellen. Thank you, Shirley. All right, take care, everyone. Have a lovely
Thanks,
afternoon.
everybody.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.